Hey, everyone out there. I know it's kind of letting people in a little bit. We're kind of starting right here at the front here, but if anybody's out there and you can hear me, love to hear in the chat where you're coming in from. So feel free to put that there. I'll just type myself so you can see it. Um, all right. New York, Florida, the Netherlands. All right. So I don't know if you're familiar with Jon Bergsteinson, one of my friends from over there. Well, no, he's in Iceland now, but Switzerland, Ireland, awesome, Texas. Very cool. Ireland again. We got a lot of representation out there. Denmark, perfect. Great to see everybody. France, Canada. Welcome everybody. I'm so glad everybody's coming in from. Hey, Johan, how are you doing?
Hey, good morning. I see a lot of international folks.
Yeah, this is going to be a.
France, oh my God, Minnesota.
It's funny how we have so many different countries all over the world. In the United States, we assume it is one country, I suppose, but it's so many different little countries as well in different respects. But probably get some some flack in the comments at some point about that. Malaysia, awesome.
Malaysia,
Um, I
that's pretty late. Pretty late for Malaysia. I'm gonna
That's going to be
say.
worth it. We'll have to make it worth it.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry for the folk from Minnesota. He actually put up U.S. Minnesota. That was a
Yes.
joke. Sorry.
No. I love the specificity personally. Germany and Italy. Oh man, that's great. One other question I want to ask is selfishly, is this your first time at Greenlight Guru? If this is your first time, let me know. I'd love to see that. And if this is your anywhere after that up to 40th, I've had some person say they were here from the 40th time at a Greenlight Guru event. I'm curious what your favorite Greenlight Guru event, podcast, webinar has been. And for those of you who don't know about our podcast, you have to check that out too. That's my project. But we are about 2 minutes in, so I guess it's time to go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is going to be Key Regulatory Insights for U.S. and EU Market Access. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the moderator for today's session. And just a few housekeeping items before we dive into our presentation, because it does look like we have some first-timers out there, which is fantastic. First, we obviously want you to actively participate. Keep that up. I'd love to see the chat. The chat is really, think of that as your interaction with the audience. So you can keep having those different talks and different things, but remember to always play nicely and be respectful. We're glad that we can have Yuan Lee here with us, and every time we have a presenter here, we want to respect their knowledge. And if you disagree, that's fine. We'll talk about it a little bit. But use that chat to connect. The Q&A tab in the top, that is where you can ask the questions that we definitely will try to get to Yuan's or to the presenter. So if you have any questions you specifically want us to ask the presenter, put those in the Q&A section. Also, even if you don't have a question yourself, if you go to that, go ahead and look at those questions, because there may be something that's relevant to you and you can upvote those. Just hit the thumbs up button, and I try to prioritize the ones that are most upvoted, so they're the most relevant questions that we're asking our audience. Second, we also always get the question, are you going to be sending the recording and the slides? Yes, we will be sending the recording and the slides to all registrants after the live event, so keep an eye on your inbox for that follow-up email. I'd like to share a few things about Greenlight Guru. At Greenlight Guru, our mission is to improve the quality of life through our work in the medical device industry, which is likely a shared goal of many of you here today. That's why we host these free webinars. We want to share those valuable insights, learn from top industry experts, and showcase our industry-leading solutions. Our software is designed to help medical device companies bring life-changing products to patients faster, more efficiently, and with less risk. Our software suite includes solutions for product development, quality management, and clinical data management, all tailored specifically for the medical device industry. So if you have a clinical trial coming up, or if you're setting up a quality management system, or if you're building out your first design controls or traceability matrix, let us know. Join over 1,000 leading medical device companies that trust Greenlight Guru by visiting www.greenlight.guru for your personalized demo after today's webinar. Now to introduce today's presenter, Yuan Lee is a orthopedic product specialist with deep expertise in Class 3 design dossiers and Class 2A, 2B technical files. He's a certified RAC, Regulatory Affairs Certified Global Regulatory Pro, and seasoned QMS and MDSAP lead auditor. Yuan brings sharp insight into ISO 13485, 510K, SEED, and global regulatory strategy. With over 5 years managing biomechanics lab projects and 7+ peer-reviewed publications, Yuan combines hands-on research and finite element analysis and FEA, and I shouldn't assume the acronyms, but in simulation with a sharp regulatory mind to help orthopedic innovators get it right the first time. There are other things that I want to ask him about that we were talking about backstage, but that's my introduction for now. Yuan, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you and take it away.
Yeah, sure. Um, Yep. Hi, everyone. I guess good morning is simply not going to cut it. Good day, I guess. Guten Tag for everyone. And name is Yuan. I'm currently the Director of Medical Business of North America, DQS. Basically, being in the certification industry for more than 10 years, started with lead auditor, product reviewer, you name it, until recently start focus more on the operational side and to support the market expansion and to help manufacturers to achieve their regulatory compliance from the certification standpoint. Um, without further ado, let's get into the presentation. What will you learn from this webinar? I guess that's the first question and very first point you wanna ask. I mean, we're here to talk about U.S. and EU market access, obviously, and hopefully you will learn to have this strategic approach to navigate your regulatory pathway. And what will be the benefits to you? Well, getting insights to enhance your global regulatory mindset along the way through your design development and even during the supplier selection, clinical trials, and last but not least, to provide some guidance on your regulatory pathway so that you can have a successful approval and or market entry of your medical device. All right. So the next question is, okay, well, why are we talking about US and the EU market? Other than, both regions are fairly advanced and mature markets, what are some of the benefits to be on both markets? Well, first off, they have overlap, obviously, in requirements. They both have fundamental framework, including the QMS based on risk. And both approvals are based on the combination of on-site audits plus the product review, or I just call it TD reviews. And both scopes cover product information, performance testing, labeling, benefit risk analysis, and the management of residual risk. And they are both evidence, the clinical data are both required to be as evidence. And they both have programs for innovation, devices with significant public benefits. I'll get into a little bit of detail on that later on. And nuances make launch in one or the other jurisdiction will help the other. Despite the difference on the reimbursement, the IP protection, both markets are fairly mature. You could expect similar outcome with those things. And not to mention the patient population is similar, the health needs, expectations are similar. And then because they are fairly mature, the healthcare structure has, similarities with little difference. And different regulatory frameworks will allow regulatory intelligence from one jurisdiction to be leveraged by another. And last but not least, the access to the rest of the world, right? APAC, for example, a lot of the Asian countries will require approval from your country of origin before you apply their regulatory approvals. So those are some of the highlights of benefits for your device to be on both markets. And then important aspect to consider for expanding from US to EU and back. All right, so well, this is oversimplified process, but in general, in the design and development phase, that's where you will really identify the testing required, and some of the things, particularly the preclinical testing, is most significant investments in medical device development for mainly two reasons. One, it will determine the level of clinical testing necessary. And two, if planned poorly, it would easily multiply the cost, right? Especially with the wrong regulatory approach. I don't know about you guys, but I came from a much more different time back then when I was in industry doing regulatory submissions, where everything is centered around US or 510K clearance, if you will. And then every testing or verification was more or less designed for that purpose and that purpose alone. Only until the product is successfully launched in US, that's where they hand it off to quote unquote international regulatory affairs for, the second market approval or the expansion of sales around the globe. But that's where we found out with the wrong regulatory approach or mindset, sometimes you run into significant issues where you cannot resolve, where a lot of times you have to either change your previous test, or worst case, you have to redo a lot of the preclinical test just to be in compliant with EU requirements or other international markets requirements. So those are a different time for sure, but that is to say, to prevent restructuring of technical documentation, additional testing, or new clinical trials, the ideal approach is to consider both EU and US requirements at the outset of product development. There are too many examples where the tunnel vision for market launch in one over another will require complete restructuring of the tech file, or worse, duplicate testing, and therefore delay the market approval or the entry of sales. So, anyways, when it comes to the two requirements or the two markets, the one of the question is, it's a dynamic environment, as any of regulatory folks would tell you. Everything's constantly changing. So how do you navigate the change, right? Because obviously the hot topic right now is harmonization from FDA to 13485, right? And then for folks who pay more attention to the EU MDR, the MDCG is completely out of control, right? So how can we as industry manage or navigate or simply keep up with the change? It's fairly easy. You need to have this mindset to tie everything into a standard. 13485, for example. And FDA just made this case easier to us, because essentially by following a highly recognized international standard, that's where you can keep up with the change, right? That's where you can really understand the changes behind all those proposals, the regulatory updates, and etc. And then obviously for MDCG, that is another layer of clarification because of the rush of MDR. But those are other things. You can keep up the change, but in general, tie everything into a recognized international standard will help you, navigate those changes. Consultant, right? That's another commonly asked question is, okay, I'm a startup, I'm small, I want to get into one market versus another. How do I deal with consultants? Or how do I find consultants, right? So this is where I will say using consultant, you have to have some fundamental assumptions, right? Assumption number one is always house your own product expertise, knowing that what you're buying into, right? Consultants, you're buying into their specific knowledge, their access to markets. I mean, obviously, preferably, you will like to work with consultants who has experience or track record with both markets you want to get into. That's for sure. But always make sure you are providing your product expertise and leverage your product expertise with the external knowledge that's being provided from the consultant. All right, clinical studies. That's another area. We got a lot of questions. How do you leverage the clinical study from one jurisdiction or one region over another? Those are the things you need to consider. And one key thing is you need to make sure your clinical data will represent the patient population in that particular jurisdiction, right? That's the first and foremost, which you will consider the diversity, the centers, and etc. And that's where I'll get to that a little bit later. The main mindset of those two regions differ significantly because FDA is a centrally controlled versus the EU. Essentially, they are member states. So, okay, some of the other aspects you need to consider, obviously, the patent, the licenses, and then the distributor requirements. And I want to highlight this over here, which the EU representative is very critical if you do choose to go into the EU market, and that is very different from the US. I will get to that a little bit later. Where do you pay attention to the regulatory personnel, because that is a requirement for your EU representative. Okay, so let's get into the key differences and similarities between the two markets. All right, so let's start with some similarities first, right? I mean, yeah, those are two very mature markets, but the significant difference, way I see it, comes from the structure. Like I was saying earlier, FDA is essentially a centralized authority in direct contact with manufacturer, while EU utilize a public-private partnership between competent authority and notified bodies, such as DQS, which intermediates. So that is the fundamental difference. And going from there, you will see a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. FDA, for example, uses a mindset we call predicate, where you essentially you just need to find a substantiate equivalent device for you to get into the market, versus for EU, we really hammer on the state of the art for the requirements. And that is essentially where you need to carry this mindset during your design and development phase to help you navigate those testing, the preclinical verification, and even the clinical trials, especially when you set up the acceptance criteria, right? I don't want to get into too much of the detail, but one example will be for your device, you are okay to be equivalent of a already marketed device in US. However, you will more than likely to get pushback from your notified body asking, why are you not superior than the device you identified? What about other devices? How do you rank among all the other devices already marketed in EU? So you can see the clear difference between the predicate mindset and the state of the art. And then, in addition, FDA relies on much more robust PMS requirements. They have, established the annual reporting, the AE reporting, and therefore the requirements on the clinical trial for most of the 510K devices is very light or lighter than the EU requirements. Well, disclaimer, we're mostly talking about the 510K devices. For anyone out there dealing with PMA, it's a whole different animal. And last but not least, because of this intermediator role, communication with notified body needs to be more frequent and tends to be less definitive. What I mean by that is for folks dealing with FDA, you like clear cut, communication. You have those formats or platform where you can leverage to meet with FDA, discuss with FDA, pre-submission discussion, etc. For notified body, it's less formal, but it's really under your control. You need to drive the communication with your notified body to get the answer you're looking for. And bear in mind, because of the role setup, notified body cannot give you consultation. So be prepared to ask question, or to put it simply, yes or no type of question, right? Don't go there and say, hey, what do you think of this? Notified body will not be able to tell you their preference over one method over another. It's your job. It's up to you, however you want to present it. Okay. Right. So obviously for everyone, we are pretty familiar with a different classification. For US, we only have three classification: 1, 2, and 3. 3 being the highest risk, versus for EU, they overcomplicate, over-engineer things. You have class 1. That's not enough. You have class 1S, class 1R, class 1M, and then you have class 2. Well, that's not nearly enough. You have 2A, 2B, and then you have 2B implantable, you have 2B exempt, and then you have class 3. But similarly, class 3 is the highest risk device. And for quality management system, for the two regions, once again, they are all based upon 13485. That's very commonly understood. And then especially with the new harmonization effort from FDA, it's going to become the final ruling. And then in, I don't know, less than 2 years, we will have this implemented. So fundamental 13485 is where you build your QMS. For EU, obviously MDR will bring in special requirements, and sometimes we'll bring in each member state requirements as well, but the fundamental stays on the 13485. That is also true for MDSAP. So all right, so crossing over to the technical documentation, I generalize the technical documentation, but in the FDA case, that's mainly referring to the 510K submission, if you will. So this is a high-level summary of the similarities and the differences of those two markets. And once again, the differences arise due to the regulatory mindsets. US relies on the equivalence of predicate and their robust post-market surveillance, while EU asks for demonstration of state-of-the-art and rely on real clinical data of your subject device. And on the process side, FDA tends to have clearly defined timeline, while TD assessment with notified body would vary significantly and normally requires a lot closer collaboration with notified body because it tends to take much longer than, say, 90 days. And well, try not to get into PMA too much, but here you go. You have this comparison between the PMA submission and the EU technical documentation. Similarly, the difference is really on the regulatory mindset and also the way you discuss with FDA is very different from the collaboration you will have with notified body. Okay, crossing over to the clinical data. The level of clinical data required varies by risk classification in both US and EU. That's well established. Both markets are a race-based approach. But whereas the EU requirements tend to be more stringent than those of the US for the lower risk devices, the opposite is true when it comes to the class 3 devices. That's where in US you really get into the long process of PMA and even longer process after the approval of PMA. In the US, class 3 devices will require clinical data with strong evidence from clinical study before the issuance of pre-market approval, and the cost, the time is quite significant. While in EU, you have PMCF, where you can leverage to obtain the market access early and to catch up on your clinical data after the approval. Okay, usability of the device, nothing really to talk about over here. The usability both recognize the IEC 62366-1, while for EU, usability is really throughout the technical documentation, which includes the clinical evaluation report, while FDA does not require the clinical evaluation for most of the 510K devices. Reimbursement, that is a very area you could leverage the consultant because they are the experts. They bring the external experience where you probably don't house it. One thing I want to highlight is, once again, because US is through FDA, it's centralized, whereas if you choose to go to EU, essentially you are going into the decentralized member states. Each member state could possibly have different reimbursement requirements, and more the reason for you to leverage the expertise externally. UDI requirements, both markets require the UDI. However, the differences arise due to the maturity. For FDA, they published and they implemented the UDI requirements by 2020, whereas for EU, the UDI is still pending full implementation ever since the first publication of the MDR. Registration and vigilance, once again, that's another area. The differences arise due to the maturity. For FDA, has years of experience running the MAUDE database supplemented by public notifications such as 483 letters, while the EU is still pending implementation of EUDAMED. And then once again, we're talking about, ever since 2017. And also FDA focuses on manufacturers and importers, while all the economic operators, including the distributor, are liable in EU. And that is the new requirement or the increased requirements from MDR. And once again, centralized in FDA, while it's decentralized in EU regions. So really collaborate with your notified body and choose your notified body based on the member state you want to enter. Post-market surveillance, that is another area. The main difference is due to the maturity of database. FDA has years of experience running the mod. It's been pretty successful, while the EU is still talking and still working on the full implementation of EUDAMED. And another difference is on the mindset again. FDA's post-market requirements is more reactive, whereas it's more reactive, such as AE reporting, whereas for EU, it's more proactive. That's where you are required to leverage your PMCF even before the market access is granted. Innovation. So once again, don't want to get into the details. However, I did include the links, the hyperlinks in the slide where you can go do your homework, further reading. Long story short, US has this breakthrough device program. You have the safer technology program, the STEP, and also the humanitarian device exemption, the HDE. Similarly, EU pushes out the innovation through MDCG over the years. There are a lot of guidances on the innovative devices, and also you have this European Innovation Council, the EIC accelerator. Albeit there's no equivalent of HDE, but there are national innovative offices such as BFARM in Germany and NICE from UK. So those are the things you could do your further reading on. Some of the other requirements, just once again, pay attention to the EU representative because of the MDR. There are increased requirements when you select your EU representative, especially pay attention to the dedicated regulatory affair person. Okay, so how to plan an effective market entry strategy to minimize costs and efforts. Planning requirements, right? You have to start with your market research, understand the regulatory requirements, reimbursement requirements, clinical trial studies, and more importantly, state of the art, and bear in mind the cultural differences and the competition already in the targeted markets. That's the first step. And then you want to align product development with international standards such as 13485, IEC 6061-1, and leverage certifications such as 13485 and MDSAP. So, and last but not least, you want to partner with the local experts, leverage the expertise externally or house those expertise externally, and you want to have this perfect marriage between your product expertise with those external expertise. All right, just to recap, first, when you okay, so timing is everything. So when you talk about the global regulatory framework, you want to understand the markets you want to get into, and then the differences and similarities between those two markets. For example, the predicate mindset versus the state of the art. And remember the example I talked about when you design your preclinical testing or verification, you want to bear those in your design and to select your acceptance criteria carefully, or in a way to satisfy both requirements from the get-go, and then the regulatory mindset to know the differences and the root cause of the differences, right? For FDA, it's a centralized government versus the model for EU is really the competent authority, and you have the intermediate notified body. How can you leverage that relationship? How can you collaborate with the intermediate to help you get to where you want to go? And know what you're buying from the consultant. Always make sure you're the one housing the product expertise, and to know exactly what you're buying into, where you want to house external knowledge, and to help you figure out like reimbursements, the patent protection, etc. And then implement the strategic planning. Once again, the testing, during the testing, what were you walk away from, and to be able to satisfy both requirements, and then to, when you design your clinical study, what are the things you need to watch out for, and knowing the differences on the two markets due to the maturity on the post-market surveillance requirements, on the experience running public database and UDI, for example. So to end this presentation, what I want to really highlight is to have this, or at least try to have this perfect marriage between the internal and external expertise. Know what you have to house versus what you can leverage from consultants. All right. With that, so that is end of my presentation. So I'm going to give it back to the host and see if there are any questions.
Hey, Yuan, thank you so much. That was great. And yeah, there are a lot of questions, so I was just trying to navigate over there to
Great.
get. Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
I thought this was kind of quiet.
Yeah.
I had some other webinars where the questions are coming in real time, and yeah.
The questions are, so there were a lot of questions.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't going to interrupt you.
I just not.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little more lonely when you're
I'm shielded from the. Yeah.
So Natasha asked the question, how can the clinical data of US FDA approval be transferred into meeting the EU requirements of clinical testing for devices with non-medical purpose?
Oh gosh. What?
So, and actually,
like
I read this and I didn't get into the non-medical purpose. If we zoom out, if maybe to make this broad and a little bit more relevant to the entire audience, let's break this down a little bit. What about the use of clinical data from one country to the next, maybe vice versa? I know you touched on this a little bit. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, for sure. So let me take this question, the first part of the question, right? I'll get to the non-medical part later.
Sure.
So it's always possible. The answer is yes. It's always possible to leverage the clinical data you gather from one region to put into the submission, or to satisfy the requirement of another region, with the consideration of all the things, right? The representation of the new market's population, the condition, and you want to understand the power as well, because I don't know what it really depends on the risk classification of your device in US. You might have a different requirement when it comes to the clinical data. Sample size, is it going to be enough to satisfy the EU requirement on the sample size? So those are the easy answers, but I want to take a different angle to answer this. When it comes to clinical data, you have to understand the reason why behind that, right? Why is it FDA or the competent authority asking for the clinical data? Risk management, right? Every clinical data is a result or the outcome of your risk management. There are residual risk that you cannot address. You can't address those residual risks based on your preclinical or the testing. What do you do? Clinical data. So understanding that will help you really leverage whatever you have to the next market. EU for your question for that matter. The real question you need to answer is out of your risk management, what are the residual risk? And then compare that with the clinical study or the clinical data you have at hand to say, okay, how can I tie my clinical data obtained from US to answer the residual risk? And that's the way you see it, and that will have a higher chance of satisfy notified body and then therefore the competent authority. So that's my answer to your first part. And the second part, the non-medical purpose, that is actually very tricky for two reasons mainly, right? Number one is I blame everything on MDR. MDR is like the worst publication of requirements or regulation. I think many of you guys would agree with me. It made our life significantly worse. And then the non-medical purpose is in MDR, but I don't think anyone understand where it stands, right? So that here comes the second part is it really depends on your particular notified body. But there is a plus side. Notified body, they're casual. You can just yeah. I'm not sure every notified body runs the same, but like DQS, for example, we have regulatory affair managers. They're essentially your client manager. You have a question, you ask. You say, hey, look, I have this product. Those are the things I have, like clinical data from US, for example. But I want to understand if I file this to EU or to MDR, where is land, right? Do you have the designation for the non-medical, or do you even agree that this device, my device, has a non-medical purpose? Those are the fair questions. I would highly recommend you to ask away just to get that initial step with your notified body, and you can determine your strategy based on their reaction. So that is my answer. I know it's not definitive, but hey, I warned you in my slide, right? Notified body is less likely to give you definitive answer, and here I am sticking to it.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thanks so much. I appreciate you being willing to break it down like that.
Yeah.
So there's another question, and maybe you have this out there and can just direct to somebody, but Miriam, if I'm saying your name correctly, asked, is there a checklist or some kind of publication guidance covering different market requirements? I think Greenlight Guru has done maybe not a light overview, but I don't know if you have any specific places you want to point to.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And this to great consultants such as Greenlight Guru, it's an easy task. They can easily break it down for you, and they probably have some kind of checklist. But if you have specific question on tech file on MDR, I would recommend you go on dqsglobal.com. We have those public information for you to read upon. So yeah. And not to mention AI, right? You can ask ChatGPT for that.
Yeah, and actually, maybe that's a good segue to a question asked by James Kano. It's not as high as Vo's just because it just came in, but I think it's worth mentioning. In your opinion, how much impact is AI going to have on how we traditionally conduct our business, especially when dealing with regulatory agencies and notified bodies? Any thoughts there?
Oh, wow. Any thoughts? I have too many. So I just kind of give you a recent example, I was doing some research on the harmonization of 13485, right? I mean, what do? I ask ChatGPT, right? I mean, you ask ChatGPT to gather all the information from the web for me, but do pay attention to hallucination because I ran into that. Everybody knows the final ruling, right? The harmonization of 13485, the implementation date on the final ruling says February 2026, right? I mean, there's no argue about it. 2 years from the publication, which was last year, February. But then to my surprise, ChatGPT keeps referring the final implementation to fall of 2025. I don't know where it got it, but the way it presented itself with such confidence and embedded into some really technical information that reminds me about the old saying, trust but verified, right? You
Right.
want to make sure you leverage the tool, but you're the driver. You want to make sure you verify every information that got from AI. Yes, um, the way I see it, AI is a great tool to help you do the initial research, right? If you have a new topic you want to get into or a new market you want to get into, then you ask the question to AI to help you gather the first round. But it is really up to you to go from there. You need to take the first round of feedback from AI and go to the next level. And that to me will make the difference, right? Because everyone can ask a question, but it's up to you how you take those answers and drive to the next level. And AI, obviously being a great tool, will provide easy access to the regulatory knowledge, the intelligence we used to call. I don't know nowadays, back in the days, we had companies even have regulatory, a subgroup of regulatory folks call themselves regulatory intelligence group. Now, I guess, you have Chat GPT, you have AI who can do a perfect job on that. But once again, you need to take their initial information and process it with your knowledge. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, I like the little
Yeah,
comment
yes,
that came in.
I see it in the chat. I think that sums it very good. You need to be expert enough to correct ChatGPT. Yes,
Yep.
you need
Great.
to have that. At least you need to try to get that next level of expertise, so that you can be better than ChatGPT.
I'll throw one other thing out there from the other side. So you're kind of referring to AI from the user standpoint of us submitting to an authority, but then the FDA announced last week, actually, the completion of their first AI-assisted scientific review for a drug, and as a result, I believe I believe the announcement was made that they're planning to scale the use of AI internally at the FDA centers by June 30th of this year. So that will be interesting to see how that
Yeah,
changes the.
that's very
I don't know.
aggressive too. That's
Ideally, it
very
shouldn't change
aggressive.
anything, but yeah, that's pretty aggressive. So
Yeah, normally they go through the public opinion phase, but I guess, well, because it's internal, I guess that's a reason why.
yeah,
Yeah, be interested to see how that plays out.
yeah, yeah. That the public opinion phase is another thing, but we won't go down that rabbit trail. There's a lot there that's changing at the FDA that I'm really curious about.
Yeah, no, I'm just reading the chat. James had a follow-up comment
Yeah,
based on what you stated, significant decision on product approvals based on AI and not traditional research and investigation. Well, that to me, well, I'm old, so I would say no, not not in the short term. I can personally guarantee in DQS that's not going to happen in the short term. But I once again I see AI as a tool, right? I don't think it's just like my background. My background is in finite element analysis. I don't know any of you even remember that, but back in the days it was kind of big, right? It's a computer simulation of mechanical system, and it was pretty popular among the joint replacements. Instead of having the surgeon to play with your implants, we do the computational simulation, how well your implant will restore the range of motion, if you will. That's a tool, right? I mean, no longer popular, if you will, but it was a tool just like artificial intelligence. At the end of the day, it's a tool. As a user, you have to be better than, or you have to know clearly what is the purpose of the tool, how you want to use it. And to me, the tool is to assist. The tool is not to replace. The significant decision will still come from the regulator, from notified body, certification reviewer, etc. We have the system, just like you guys, the QMS system, which is subject to a different standard. We have the system to allow us to make those big decisions based on evidence. However, the gathering of the evidence, I will say, can be replaced by AI, but how fast? I don't know. It's really interesting to see it play out.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting, all the changes that are going on right now. So I'm trying to find the question I was looking for.
Well, I
Let's
feel
ask
like
this question.
I'm just reading the chat. It's popping up. I feel like artificial intelligence just hijacked the whole conversation.
Yeah, I don't want us to go to. I'm sure there are
Yeah,
some people like,
it's inevitable, right? It's inevitable.
it's one of those things that's moving so fast it's hard to really
Yeah, I
report
know.
on because it's going to change here
Yeah.
in a moment. But here's a question from Sionman, if I'm saying your name correctly. Apologies if not. Is one person small company? Can you do both the PRCC or PRRC, person responsible for regular compliance, and QA together? What are your thoughts there, and what are your recommendations?
Short answer is yes, of course. I personally audited so many small company with one person. So essentially everything is outsourced, right? You outsource your design, you outsource your production, you outsource everything. But I don't know about you. Your life is gonna get very busy. That's for sure, right? But then it's essentially possible. But what we come on as a notified body or essentially any regulatory body, what we look for is the control you have in place, right? You can assume any role you want, but how can you demonstrate the level of control within reasonable expectation, right? If you tell me you wear 7 hats for one person and you still live a 24/7 regular day, well, I mean, it's kind of hard sell for me. So, well, I guess at some point we'll put it this way, just like DQS. I'm more of a entrepreneur, if you will. I basically set up the US operation, but you have to have a mechanism to grow, right? Yeah, I wear so many hats in the beginning, but then at some point I decide, okay, well, this is where I draw the line. I need a new position to help me take on these and these responsibilities, and then that's how you can grow. Well, unless it's I don't know, I don't really know your product, your business, or your ambition, um, unless it's really sufficient to be run by just one person.
So there are a couple questions in a good answer. I think that's great. That makes sense. There are a couple of questions related to the governmental changes. I guess maybe we can address that if you care to, or have an opinion or thought on this. Questions. Well, you kind of touched on this one, and we can maybe weave in a few other things about the current political environment in the U.S. And what are your thoughts?
Have you seen more manufacturer moving to launch first in EU based? Oh yeah, this is a hot topic actually. So I'm gonna try to be apolitical as much as possible, and I'm an engineer by course, so I operate on data. I can tell you the data I've seen for Q1. There's a lot of uncertainty, right? What that translates is U.S. manufacturers putting things on hold, right? They're no longer pushing for their US launch as of 2025. They're postponing it. But as a result, there has to be some alternative. Are they going to go to Canada first? Are they going to go to EU first? Those are all the questions I'm sure they're entertaining. I actually have seen manufacturers, US manufacturers, instead of pushing for 510K first, they start with CE marking just because of the certainty, right? Well, I mean, albeit dealing with notified body is always a hassle, but still, MDR has been there for many years. Yeah, we have highs and lows, but hey, compared to the current political environment in US, that to me will be certainty. And if you end of the day, if your plan is to launch your product in both regions, there's no reason for you to go over US first. You have to go US first versus EU first. Wherever market can give you that first revenue generation to push for your next market, that's right. I mean, the bank doesn't. I mean, yeah, I guess you will be paid in euro, but the bank doesn't really care. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah. And I guess if you wanted to really beat that analogy to death, you could talk about the strength of the euro versus strength of the dollar and so on. But it's
Yeah.
it's good. No, it's good. I appreciate you looking at the data that you've seen so far. So,
Yeah.
another question. So let's say someone's gone down that path. Let's make this the last question. You've already talked a little bit about this, but I guess, yeah, we actually already answered this question. We're going to first clinical trial this year in the UK. If we wanted to market in either the EU or the US, would we potentially need another trial?
Yeah, well, this is once again,
Yeah.
I feel like this is kind of related to the first question. Is you have to go through the list of questions, the big questions. Representation is like the central of everything. Sample size, representation. From UK, I would say it should be fairly easy to cross it to US, right? Because UK has similarity with US. For EU, really depends on which member state you want to market. That's where you want to really understand the representation question. But once again, try not to ask those questions in that sequence. Instead, ask question about what really am I doing in terms of clinical trial, residual risk. What are the residual risk I'm trying to address? And then answer it that way. And that's going to give you a much easier process.
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the way you approach all of these things, and I appreciate the presentation. We'll make that the last question because we are coming at the top of the hour. I know a lot of people are going to be going to the next meetings. So Yun, thank you so much for the informative presentation, all your valuable insight throughout today's session. I have a quick survey that I'd like to launch. It's just really a question of what do you think? What do you think of topics in the future you'd like to see? So I'm going to launch that now. And then if you'll answer that, that'd be very helpful for us. I know we had one person ask about IVDR specifically, maybe in the future. So we'll try to cover something like that if we're able
We
to.
definitely don't have time today.
No, absolutely not. I wasn't gonna hijack it to that extent, but I really appreciate everybody's engagement. So it's been a lively audience, and really appreciate all of that. So
thank you all for calling in and spending the time with us.
Absolutely, especially from all over the world and all the different time zones. So thank you so much on behalf of Greenlight Guru. Thank you all for attending, and we'll wish you all the great rest of your day. Everybody take care.
Yeah, thank you guys.